Chapter 3 Cleopatra and Her Son, 44 BC. On one of those same early days, as Octavius was nearing Italy, a royal Egyptian galley was leaving the harbor of Rome. On board ship, with a retinue of slaves, guards, and attendants, was a beautiful young queen. The Siren of the Nile, people often called her, for she was the enchanting, glamorous young queen of Egypt, Cleopatra. As her ship pulled out into the bay, one might have seen her standing in the stern, with a tiny boy beside her, taking a last look at Italy. For a year and a half Cleopatra had been living there, making her home in Julius Caesar's lovely villa and gardens overlooking the Tiber River. With Caesar dead and no reason to stay longer, she had now left Rome and was taking her small son back to Egypt, where he had been born. A half sigh escaped her lips as she watched the receding shoreline, and she clasped tighter the small warm hand in hers. Overhead the sky was bright and high. Blue water sparkled in the sun. For Cleopatra it was no shining day. Julius Caesar was dead, and with him had died all of their dreams, all of their plans for a great world empire to be shared by them together and inherited by their son. Julius Caesar was dead. He had not lived to found an empire. Little Caesar, his son and hers, would never become king of all the earth, though he was now too little to know or care. Cleopatra smiled down at him. How much he looked like Caesar. Strange that a child of barely 3 could so resemble a man of 58. Yet even his walk, as he trudged off with his nurse across the sunny deck, was like his father's. There seemed to be no Ptolemy in him, none of her family in his makeup. He was all Julius Caesar's son. Seated now among the cushions of a golden couch, she watched him play, reliving in memory the summer he was born. How delighted Julius Caesar had been to have a son. How he had paced about the palace halls in Alexandria, unwilling to leave for Rome until the baby was born, doubting, yet daring to hope that it would be a boy. 4 times he had been married before, and his only child had been a daughter. Now, at last, there in Egypt, in that summer of 47, he had a son. And what a son! Cleopatra smiled to think of Caesar's pride in him, that son who was both royal and divine. No one of Caesar's Roman wives, she thought, though they might call themselves patricians, could have given Caesar a son of royal blood, for there was no royalty in Rome. Those 4 wives, the 2 divorced, the 1 dead, and the 1 still married to him, were common mortals, all of them, while she, Cleopatra, had been born into the world's most royal family, the Greek Ptolemies of Egypt. Her son would rule Egypt as his Greek ancestors had ruled over the native Egyptians for more than 300 years, for it was from Alexander the Great, who had conquered Egypt and founded Alexandria, that the first Ptolemy had inherited the throne. And he would also be hailed, that son of hers, as a pharaoh, and wear the 10 times more ancient crown of the native pharaohs, whose ruined capitals and gigantic pyramid tombs had been standing years before Alexander and his general, the first Ptolemy, had come to Egypt. The gentle motion of the ship, gliding through the blue water, reminded Cleopatra of the houseboat on which she and Caesar had once journeyed leisurely southward up the Nile, to see the remains of that marvelous old civilization. There, falling on their faces before her, the poor native Egyptian farmers had greeted Cleopatra, just as their forefathers had hailed the ancient pharaohs. She remembered the envy on Caesar's face as he saw such homage paid to her as had never been accorded him, the most brilliant, powerful, and foremost citizen of Rome. Rome was a republic. Roman citizens hated kings. They had the idea that they ruled themselves and chose their leaders. A most ridiculous idea. How could a mob of ignorant, common people take the place of a king when kings were gods on earth? She, Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, had been born a goddess. She was the earthly form of the Holy Mother Isis, and her son, little Caesar, was actually the son of the almighty Amen, the great god of Egypt. So the high priest had announced to the people at his birth. Julius Caesar, they explained, was merely the human form in which the great god had appeared on earth to wed Cleopatra. As a hard-headed Roman, Julius Caesar could see how much it inspired the people with awe and respect to believe that their rulers were divine and immortal. He adjusted himself quite readily to the new position and claimed additional proof of his divinity. "My own Roman clan, the Julian," he had told her, "have a divine ancestor. We are descended from Aeneas of Troy, who was the son of Venus." Venus, many believed, was but another name for Isis. Later in Rome, Julius Caesar had built a temple to his ancestor Venus, and had placed in it a statue of her, for which she, Cleopatra, had posed. In those last months of his life, she had been happy to see Caesar begin to dress and act the part of a divine king, and to prepare to carry out their dream of empire, which had now failed so miserably. And why had it failed, this dream of theirs? Cleopatra sat up suddenly, clenching her small fist as if some quick action might yet save the day. Why had Caesar died, and their dreams died with him? Why? Because, for once in his life, he had not been bold and quick enough, she said to herself. If only he had not waited to take the final step of declaring himself king until after the campaign in the East, he might have swept the people with him before his enemies had found time to organize. Certainly, if he had only spied out those enemies first, and had them poisoned, as any Ptolemy would have done, he would still be alive. But he had been too generous with his enemies, too ambitious to cover himself with glory in one last victorious campaign. And so now he was dead. Julius Caesar was dead. And she was on her way back to Egypt with their small son, Caesarion, who had not even been mentioned in his father's will. That Cleopatra understood. Having no empire, Caesar had nothing to leave his son but money, which, as son also of the richest queen on earth, he did not need. Caesar had therefore left most of his fortune to his favorite nephew, Octavius. How fond Caesar had been of the boy Octavius! Cleopatra remembered seeing him for the first time, soon after she had come to Rome, riding beside his uncle in the African triumph. He was a pale-faced young fellow, about 6 years younger than she was herself, probably agreeable enough, but he had a nasty complexion and such little mousy teeth. She wondered how he would make out in claiming his inheritance. It would be a dangerous attempt. To her, it looked as if Rome might be in for another civil war, and on this April day, as she sailed for Egypt, it also appeared to Cleopatra that the man most likely to come out on top in the coming struggle was Mark Antony. It would be wise to keep watch of Antony. He might be of use to her and to Egypt.